What if a desperate father's search for honest work led him to the doorstep of the most powerful woman in the meat industry? He thought he was just fixing broken fences and leaky barn roofs, but what he discovered would shake the foundation of everything he believed about second chances, hidden identities, and the thin line between survival and success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Thompson had never imagined that desperation could taste like dust and smell like motor oil. As his weathered pickup truck coughed its way down the gravel road toward Riverside County, the morning sun cast long shadows across endless stretches of barbed wire and rolling pasture land. In the passenger seat, his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, clutched a worn paperback book, her blonde hair catching the light as she read silently. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that comes from understanding that sometimes words couldn't fix what was broken. The gas gauge needle hovered dangerously close to empty, much like Marcus's bank account. 3 weeks had passed since he'd been laid off from the construction company in Millfield, and the severance pay had disappeared faster than morning dew. Sophie's school supplies, groceries, rent, everything required money he didn't have. The classified ad he'd torn from the local newspaper was folded carefully in his shirt pocket, the ink slightly smudged from his sweaty palms. Ranch hand needed. General repairs, maintenance. Experience preferred, but will train right person. Competitive pay. Contact Victoria Hartwell, Sunset Ridge Ranch. Marcus had called the number 3 times before someone answered. The woman's voice had been crisp, professional, almost businesslike, but not unkind. She'd asked few questions. Could he start immediately? Was he reliable? Did he have transportation? When he'd mentioned Sophie, there had been a pause then. A simple statement. Bring her along. There's plenty of space here for a child to be safe while you work. The truck's engine wheezed as they crested a small hill, and suddenly the landscape opened up before them like a painting. Sunset Ridge Ranch sprawled across the valley floor, a patchwork of green pastures separated by weathered wooden fences. Black Angus cattle dotted the fields like living sculptures, their sleek coats gleaming in the morning light. In the distance, a cluster of buildings rose from the earth, a sprawling ranch house with a wraparound porch, several large barns with red metal roofs, and various outbuildings that spoke of a working operation. "Daddy, look," Sophie whispered, pressing her face to the window. "It's like something from my books." Marcus smiled despite his nervousness. Sophie had always found magic in the simplest things, a trait that had carried them both through the darkest months after her mother's death 3 years ago. Cancer had taken Rebecca quickly, leaving Marcus to navigate single parenthood, while dealing with medical bills that still arrived in the mail like unwelcome reminders of everything he'd lost. The main gate stood open, flanked by stone pillars, topped with wrought iron lanterns. A sign in elegant script read, "Sunset Ridge Ranch, established 1892. Marcus guided the truck down the long driveway, noting the perfect condition of the fencing, the manicured landscaping around the main house, and the general air of prosperity that seemed to emanate from every surface. As they approached the main house, Marcus's stomach tightened. The building was magnificent, a 2-story structure with cream-colored siding, dark green shutters, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Hanging baskets overflowed with colorful flowers, and a swing moved gently in the morning breeze. It was the kind of home that belonged in magazines, not in the desperate job search of a down-on-his-luck construction worker. "Maybe we should turn around," Marcus muttered, suddenly aware of his faded jeans and work boots, of Sophie's clothes that were clean but clearly secondhand. "No, Daddy," Sophie said firmly, closing her book and looking at him with eyes that were far too wise for her 8 years. "Mama always said that good people care more about your heart than your wallet." Before Marcus could respond, the front door of the house opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch. Even from a distance, she commanded attention. Tall and elegant, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore jeans and a white button-down shirt that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. As Marcus parked the truck and climbed out, he could see that she was younger than her voice had suggested, probably in her mid-30s, with sharp features and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Thompson?" she called out, walking down the porch steps with an extended hand. "I'm Victoria Hartwell. Thank you for coming out so quickly." Marcus wiped his palm on his jeans before shaking her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested she wasn't afraid of hard work herself. "Thank you for the opportunity, ma'am. This is my daughter, Sophie." Victoria's expression softened slightly as she looked down at Sophie, who was standing close to Marcus's side, but not hiding behind him. "Hello, Sophie. I hope you brought some good books with you. There's a wonderful reading spot under the old oak tree by the pond." Sophie's eyes lit up. "I brought 3 books. Do you really have a pond?" "I do indeed. With ducks and everything." Victoria's smile seemed genuine, and Marcus felt some of his tension ease. "But first, let me show your father around and explain what needs to be done." They walked toward the barns, Victoria pointing out various aspects of the ranch as they went. The operation was larger than Marcus had expected: several hundred head of cattle, extensive hay fields, and infrastructure that spoke of serious investment and planning. Victoria explained that she'd inherited the ranch from her grandmother 5 years ago and had been working to modernize and expand the operation ever since. The previous ranch hand had to leave suddenly family emergency back east, she explained. As they approached the first barn, "I need someone who can handle general maintenance, some basic carpentry, fence repairs. The pay is $1,500 a week, plus a cottage on the property if you're interested." Marcus nearly stumbled. $1,500 a week was more than he'd made at the construction company, and housing would solve another major problem. "That's very generous, ma'am." "It's fair," Victoria corrected. "Good help is worth paying for." The first barn was massive, with high ceilings and stalls that could house dozens of horses. Currently, it held equipment tractors, hay balers, and various tools that all looked new and well-maintained. Victoria explained that she was converting it into equipment storage and maintenance facility. "The roof leaks in 3 places," she said, pointing upward, "and the electrical system needs updating. Nothing dangerous, but the outlets are insufficient for modern equipment." Marcus nodded, already mentally cataloging what would be needed. "I can handle that. Might take a few days to source materials, depending on what you have locally. Whatever you need, just let me know. We have accounts at most of the suppliers in town." They continued the tour, Victoria showing him the other barns, the cattle handling facilities, and various outbuildings that needed attention. With each stop, Marcus's confidence grew. This was work he understood, problems he could solve. Victoria seemed to sense his growing comfort and began asking more detailed questions about his approach to various repairs. "The fence line along the north pasture needs about a 1/4 mile of posts replaced," she said as they walked along a section of aging wooden fence. "Previous storms have taken their toll." Marcus examined the fence posts, noting the rot at the base of several and the way the wire sagged in places. "Wood posts, or would you consider metal? What would you recommend?" "Metal lasts longer, especially in this climate. Initial cost is higher, but over time it's more economical." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "That's exactly the kind of thinking I need. My grandmother was old school, believed in doing things the way they'd always been done. But I'm more interested in what works best." As they walked back toward the main house, Marcus found himself relaxing in Victoria's presence. She was clearly knowledgeable about ranch operations, asking intelligent questions and offering insights that suggested she was far from a passive owner. There was something about her, though a careful precision in her words, a way of deflecting personal questions that suggested there was more to her story than she was sharing. Sophie had discovered the oak tree Victoria had mentioned and was already settled beneath it with her book, looking perfectly content. A small pond sparkled nearby, and sure enough, a family of ducks paddled lazily across the surface. "She's welcome to spend time here while you work," Victoria said, following Marcus's gaze. "The ranch can be isolated, and I imagine she gets lonely." "She's used to it," Marcus said quietly. "It's been just the two of us for a while now." Victoria glanced at him but didn't pry, for which Marcus was grateful. The wound of Rebecca's death was still tender, and he'd learned that most people either wanted details he wasn't ready to share or offered platitudes that only made the pain worse. "The cottage is just past the second barn," Victoria said, changing the subject smoothly. "It's small but comfortable. 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, and it's been recently updated." The cottage was indeed small, maybe 800 square feet, but it was spotless and charming. A covered porch faced west toward the setting sun, and the interior was furnished simply but comfortably. Sophie would have her own room for the first time since they'd left their apartment in Millfield. "The school bus stops at the main gate," Victoria added. "Sophie could catch it there if you decide to take the job." Marcus looked around the cottage, then out the window toward the vast expanse of the ranch. It was more than he'd dared to hope for: honest work, good pay, a safe place for Sophie to call home. But something in Victoria's manner suggested there were layers to this opportunity that he didn't yet understand. "Can I ask you something, ma'am?" "Victoria, please. And yes, this is a big operation. Surely you could hire someone with more experience, better credentials. Why take a chance on someone like me?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, looking out toward the fields where cattle grazed peacefully. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, almost vulnerable. "Because sometimes the best people are the ones who understand what it means to start over. And because my grandmother always said that you can tell more about a person by how they treat someone who can't help them than by anything else." Marcus frowned. "I'm not sure I follow. When you called, you asked if it would be a problem to bring Sophie. Not whether it was allowed, but whether it would be a problem for her, for me, for the work. That told me you put her needs first, but you also think about how your decisions affect other people." It was such a simple observation, but it struck Marcus as profoundly perceptive. He'd spent so many months focused on just surviving, on finding any work that would pay the bills, that he'd forgotten how rare it was to find someone who looked beyond the surface. "I'd like to take the job," he said simply. Victoria smiled, the first truly relaxed expression he'd seen from her. "Good. You can start tomorrow if you'd like. I'll have supplies delivered for the roof repair by afternoon." As they walked back toward Marcus's truck to retrieve their belongings, Sophie came running from the pond, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, there are baby ducks. And Miss Victoria said I could help feed them sometimes." Marcus looked at Victoria, who shrugged with mock innocence. "They need to be fed twice a day. Might as well make it educational." That evening, as Marcus unpacked their few belongings in the cottage, Sophie explored every corner of their new home with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been given an unexpected gift. The refrigerator was stocked with basics: milk, eggs, bread. Fresh fruit and a note on the counter welcomed them and provided phone numbers for emergencies. "This is the nicest place we've ever lived," Sophie announced, bouncing on her new bed. Marcus had to agree. The cottage was simple but comfortable, and through the windows he could see the lights of the main house glowing warmly in the distance. For the first time in months, he felt something that might have been hope. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Marcus sat on the porch listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowed softly in the distance, and somewhere an owl called. Out across the fields. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. It was peaceful in a way that Marcus had almost forgotten existed. A light was still on in the main house, and Marcus found himself wondering about Victoria Hartwell. She was clearly successful, clearly intelligent, but there was something guarded about her, something that suggested she was as careful with trust. As he was, the ranch was beautiful and well run, but it seemed like a lonely place for a woman to manage alone. Marcus shook his head, reminding himself that Victoria Hartwell's personal life was none of his business. He was here to work, to provide for Sophie, to build some stability in their uncertain world. Whatever secrets his new employer might have were her own to keep. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp air that promised a perfect day for outdoor work. Marcus was up early, as was his habit, and found that Victoria had left a thermos of coffee and a bag of pastries on his porch with another note. Thought you might want to start with caffeine. Feed store delivery should arrive by 9. Sophie was still sleeping, exhausted by the excitement of their move and the security of knowing they had a place to belong, at least for now. Marcus drank his coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the pastures and planning his approach to the roof repair. By 8 o'clock, he was examining the barn roof more closely, identifying the source of the leaks and calculating materials. The damage was more extensive than it had appeared from the ground, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with patience and the right supplies. As he worked, he became aware of activity around the ranch, the sound of vehicles, voices calling out. Instructions, the general bustle of a working operation. A feed truck arrived just after 9, followed by a flatbed carrying roofing materials. Marcus was surprised by the quality of what had been ordered: top-grade shingles, proper flashing, everything needed for a repair that would last decades rather than just patch the immediate problem. Ms. Hartwell wants it done right, the delivery driver explained when Marcus commented on the materials. Always orders the best stuff. Never seen anyone run a ranch quite like her. How long has she owned this place? Marcus asked, signing for the delivery. The driver shrugged. 5-6 years maybe? Took over from her grandmother. Old Mrs. Hartwell was a character, ran this place with an iron fist for 40 years. Granddaughters. Different though, more modern, I guess you'd say. As the trucks pulled away, Marcus began organizing his materials and planning the repair sequence. The work would take several days, but he was looking forward to it. There was something satisfying about fixing things, about taking something broken and making it whole again. Victoria appeared around mid-morning, dressed in work clothes and carrying a clipboard. She moved through the ranch with purposeful efficiency, checking on various aspects of the operation. Marcus watched her interact with the ranch hands who came and went. She was clearly in charge, but her authority seemed to come from knowledge and competence rather than mere position. "How's the assessment looking?" she asked when she reached the barn where Marcus was working. "Worse than it looked from the ground, but nothing that can't be fixed properly," Marcus replied, pointing out the areas of concern. "Should have it weatherproof again by the end of the week." Victoria nodded, making notes on her clipboard. "What about the electrical situation?" "I'll need to bring in a qualified electrician for the main panel work, but I can handle the outlet installations once the new circuits are run." "Good. I'll make some calls." She paused, looking up at the roof. "I appreciate you being thorough. Too many people want to just slap a patch on things and call it fixed." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. "My daddy always said that if something's worth doing, it's worth doing right the first time. Shortcuts usually cost more in the long run." Something in Victoria's expression shifted slightly, became more thoughtful. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was. Taught me everything I know about building and fixing things before he passed. I'm sorry for your loss." Marcus nodded, appreciating the simple acknowledgement without excessive sympathy. He'd have liked this place. always said that good land and honest work were the foundation of everything worthwhile. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What happened to your previous job, if you don't mind me asking?" Marcus had been expecting this question, though he'd hoped to avoid it a little longer. Company downsized. Last hired, first fired. Construction's been slow in our area. It was true, as far as it went, though it didn't include the part about the medical bills that had forced him to take time off during Rebecca's illness, or the way potential employers seemed to view single fathers as unreliable. Victoria seemed to sense there was more to the story, but she didn't press. "Well, their loss is my gain," she said simply. "I'll let you get back to work." As she walked away, Marcus found himself admiring her practical approach to both business and personal interactions. She asked enough questions to understand what she needed to know, but she didn't pry into areas that weren't her concern. It was a rare quality, and one that made him feel more comfortable about the arrangement they'd entered into. The morning flew by as Marcus lost himself in the familiar rhythm of physical work. By lunchtime, he'd stripped away the damaged sections of roofing and begun preparing the surface for repairs. Sophie appeared around noon, having spent the morning exploring the ranch and reading under her tree. "Miss Victoria said I could eat lunch with her today," Sophie announced, bouncing with excitement. "She's making grilled cheese sandwiches." Marcus felt a moment of uncertainty. Sophie was friendly and trusting, qualities that had served her well in their travels, but that also made him protective. "You don't have to impose on Miss Victoria's time, sweetheart." "It's no imposition," Victoria's voice called from behind him. "I was making lunch anyway, and I could use the company." Marcus turned to find Victoria approaching with a plate of sandwiches and a bottle of water. She handed them to him with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she seemed to bring to everything. "Sophie's been telling me about her books," Victoria continued. "Apparently, she's working her way through the entire children's section of the Millfield library. I like adventure stories," Sophie explained seriously, "and mysteries. And books about animals." "Well, you've come to the right place for animals," Victoria said with a smile. "Maybe after lunch, I can show you the new calves. They were born just last week." Sophie's eyes went wide with delight, and Marcus felt his chest tighten with gratitude. It had been a long time since anyone had shown such genuine interest in his daughter's happiness. "That's very kind of you," Marcus said quietly. Victoria waved off his thanks. "Like I said, I could use the company. This place can get pretty quiet during the day." As Victoria and Sophie headed toward the main house, Marcus reflected on how surreal his life had become in the span of 24 hours. Yesterday, he'd been facing eviction and counting out coins for gas money. Today, he was working on a beautiful ranch, living in a comfortable cottage, and watching his daughter light up with joy for the first time in months. The afternoon brought new challenges as Marcus began the actual repair work. The barn's roof was higher than he was used to working, and the angle was steep enough to require careful attention to safety. But the work felt good, purposeful in a way that his previous job hadn't always provided. There was something about fixing problems on a working ranch, about contributing to something that had deep roots and clear purpose, that made every hour feel meaningful. Around 3 o'clock, Victoria returned with Sophie in tow, both of them slightly dusty and grinning. Sophie was clutching a small notebook and talking animatedly about the calves they'd visited. "I got to name one," Sophie announced to Marcus. "I called her Buttercup because she's yellow like butter and she kept trying to eat the flowers." Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him with its ease. "That sounds like a perfect name." "Victoria said I could help feed them sometimes, if it's okay with you," Sophie continued. Looking at her father with hopeful eyes, Marcus glanced at Victoria, who shrugged with studied casualness. "Calves need to be fed twice a day anyway. Might as well make it educational." "We'll see," Marcus said, but his tone was gentle rather than dismissive. Sophie seemed to understand that this was parents speak for probably yes, and she beamed with satisfaction. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus became increasingly aware of the rhythm of the ranch around him. Trucks came and went, workers moved cattle from one pasture to another, and Victoria seemed to be everywhere at once, checking on animals, supervising repairs to equipment, and maintaining the complex logistics that kept such an operation running smoothly. What struck him most was how competent she was. This wasn't a hobby ranch or a vanity project for someone with more money than sense. Victoria clearly understood every aspect of the operation, from animal husbandry to equipment maintenance to what appeared to be sophisticated financial planning. She moved through her domain with the confidence of someone who had earned her authority through knowledge and hard work. Yet there was something about her interactions with others that seemed slightly careful, as if she was maintaining a professional distance that went beyond normal business relationships. The ranch hands respected her, but there was a formality to their interactions that suggested she kept her personal and professional lives strictly separated. As the sun began to set, painting the pastures in shades of gold and amber, Marcus climbed down from the roof and began organizing his tools for the next day. Sophie had returned to her reading spot by the pond, and the peaceful scene made Marcus feel something he hadn't experienced in years: contentment. "Good first day?" Victoria's voice came from behind him. Marcus turned, noting that she looked tired but satisfied. "Very good. Thank you again for the opportunity." "Thank you for taking it." Victoria paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. "I hope you and Sophie will be happy here." There was something in her tone, a hint of loneliness perhaps, that made Marcus look at her more closely. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he caught a glimpse of something vulnerable underneath. "I think we will be," Marcus said quietly. "It's been a long time since Sophie has had space to just be a kid." Victoria nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. Childhood should be about wonder and safety, not worry. It was such a simple statement, but it carried the weight of personal experience. Marcus found himself wondering what Victoria's childhood had been like, whether she'd had the luxury of wonder and safety, or if she, like Sophie, had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Well," Victoria said, her professional demeanor sliding back into place, "I'll let you get settled. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." As she walked away toward the main house, Marcus gathered Sophie and headed back to their cottage. The evening was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of cattle settling for the night and the distant call of coyotes in the hills. Inside their new home, Sophie chattered excitedly about her day while Marcus prepared a simple dinner from the groceries Victoria had thoughtfully provided. Later, after Sophie had fallen asleep in her new room, Marcus sat on the porch again, processing the events of his first day at Sunset Ridge Ranch. Everything about the situation seemed almost too good to be true: the generous pay, the comfortable housing, Victoria's genuine kindness toward Sophie. In his experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were, but he couldn't identify any obvious red flags or hidden agendas. Victoria Hartwell was clearly a woman of means and intelligence, running a sophisticated operation with skill and dedication. If she had secrets, and Marcus suspected she did, they seemed to be personal rather than professional. Her ranch was legitimate, her treatment of employees fair, and her care for Sophie's well-being appeared genuine. As Marcus prepared for bed, he found himself looking forward to the next day's work in a way he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Rebecca's death, he was beginning to believe that he and Sophie might actually build something resembling a stable life. The ranch felt like a place where they could put down roots, where Sophie could grow up surrounded by open spaces and the kind of honest work that built character. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets Victoria might be keeping, Marcus was determined to prove himself worthy of the chance she'd given them. He'd rebuild her barns, fix her fences, and maintain her equipment with the same care and attention he'd want someone to show his own property. In return, Sunset Ridge Ranch would give them something they'd been searching for since leaving Millfield: a place to call home. The last thing Marcus saw before falling asleep was the warm glow of lights from the main house across the field, a beacon in the darkness that somehow made him feel less alone in the world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove himself, but tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus Thompson slept without worrying about tomorrow's bills or next week's rent. In the main house, Victoria Hartwell stood at her office window, looking out toward the cottage where her new employees were settling in for the night. The ranch felt different, already more alive somehow, as if the presence of a child's laughter and a father's dedication had awakened something that had been sleeping too long. She turned back to her desk, where reports and financial statements waited for her attention. The ranch was more successful than most people realized, but success in agriculture required constant vigilance and adaptation. Markets shifted, weather patterns changed, and the delicate balance between profit and sustainability demanded careful attention to every detail. But tonight, instead of focusing on spreadsheets and projections, Victoria found herself thinking about Marcus Thompson's careful competence and his daughter's infectious joy. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to care about her employees as people rather than simply as contributors to the ranch's success. The isolation that had once seemed like protection was beginning to feel more like a prison. Victoria shook her head, reminding herself that emotional distance was a necessary part of leadership. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, through failures and betrayals that had taught her to guard her heart as carefully as she guarded her business interests. Marcus and Sophie were employees, nothing more, and she couldn't afford to forget that distinction. Yet as she finally turned off the lights and headed upstairs to her bedroom, Victoria couldn't quite shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted on Sunset Ridge Ranch. The morning would bring new challenges and the eternal demands of running a complex operation, but it would also bring the sound of Sophie's laughter and the sight of Marcus's steady dedication to honest work. For reasons she didn't fully understand, Victoria was looking forward to tomorrow in a way she hadn't in years. Perhaps it was simply the relief of having competent help, or maybe it was the reminder that life could include joy and connection, alongside responsibility and achievement. Whatever the reason, as Victoria fell asleep in her large, quiet house, she was smiling. The third week at Sunset Ridge Ranch brought an unseasonable cold snap that turned the morning grass silver with frost and sent the cattle huddling together in the shelter of the windbreaks. Marcus had grown accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life, rising before dawn to check the weather and plan his day's work according to what the land and animals needed most. On this particular morning, he was replacing a section of fence line that bordered the main highway when he noticed Victoria's truck parked at an odd angle near the cattle guard, steam rising from under the hood. She was standing beside the vehicle with her phone pressed to her ear, her normally composed expression showing clear frustration. Marcus finished securing the post he'd been working on and walked over to where Victoria stood. She ended her call with what sounded like barely controlled irritation and looked up as he approached. "Truck trouble?" he asked, noting the way she unconsciously rubbed her temple. "The radiator decided this was the perfect morning to give up," Victoria replied, gesturing at the steam. "And naturally, this is the day I have 3 different appointments in town that can't be rescheduled." Marcus lifted the hood and examined the damage. The radiator had a crack along one side, and coolant was pooling on the ground beneath the truck. It wasn't a roadside repair, but it wasn't catastrophic either. "I can patch this temporarily to get you to town," he offered. "Won't hold forever, but it'll get you through your appointments if we're careful." Victoria looked skeptical. You sure? I don't want to impose on your schedule." "It's not an imposition. Besides, you can't run a ranch from the side of the road." 20 minutes later, Marcus had fashioned a temporary seal using materials from his toolkit and refilled the radiator with water from the ranch's emergency supplies. Victoria watched him work with an expression that seemed to shift between admiration and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked as Marcus tested the repair. "Necessity," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "When you're raising a kid on a construction worker's salary, you learn to fix everything yourself or do without." Victoria was quiet for a moment, and Marcus sensed that his casual reference to financial struggle had touched something in her. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than usual. "That shouldn't have been necessary. A man willing to work hard should be able to provide for his family without having to choose between fixing his truck and buying groceries." There was an edge to her words that suggested personal experience, but Marcus didn't pry. Instead, he closed the hood and handed her the keys. "This should get you to town and back, but you'll want to have it properly repaired as soon as possible. I know a good mechanic in Riverside if you need a recommendation." "Thank you," Victoria said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "I owe you one." "No, you don't. We're even." As Victoria drove away, Marcus found himself thinking about her reaction to his casual mention of financial hardship. Most wealthy people he'd encountered either ignored such references or responded with uncomfortable sympathy. Victoria's response had been different, angry, almost, as if the unfairness of the situation personally offended her. That afternoon, while Marcus was installing new electrical outlets in the equipment barn, Sophie came running up with excitement, radiating from every inch of her small frame. "Daddy! Ms. Victoria is back and she brought presents." Marcus looked up from the outlet he was wiring, concerned. "Sophie, we've talked about this. We can't accept gifts from Ms. Victoria. It's not appropriate." "But Daddy, they're not really presents. They're tools." Curious despite himself, Marcus set down his wire strippers and followed Sophie outside. Victoria's truck was parked near the main barn, and the bed was loaded with various items covered by a tarp. Victoria emerged from the ranch house as they approached, looking slightly embarrassed. "Before you say anything," she began, holding up a hand to forestall Marcus's objections, "these aren't gifts. They're investments in ranch efficiency." She pulled back the tarp to reveal a collection of professional-grade tools, a new cordless drill set, precision levels, electrical testing equipment, and other items that Marcus recognized as significant upgrades to his current toolkit. "Victoria, I can't accept these," Marcus said immediately. "They must have cost. They cost less than hiring an outside contractor to do the work you're doing," Victoria interrupted. "And they'll pay for themselves in improved efficiency and quality. It's a business decision, not charity." Marcus examined the tools more closely. They were exactly what he would have chosen if money were no object, professional grade, but practical. Designed for daily use rather than show. Victoria had clearly done her research. "Besides," Victoria continued, "these tools belong to the ranch. If you ever leave, they stay here for the next person." It was a diplomatic way of framing the situation, and Marcus appreciated the care she'd taken to preserve his dignity, while providing him with the equipment he needed to do his job properly. Still, he hesitated. "Daddy," Sophie said quietly, tugging on his sleeve, "Miss Victoria says the best way to say thank you is to do really good work with them." Marcus looked down at his daughter, then back at Victoria, who was trying not to smile at Sophie's intervention. "In that case," Marcus said formally, "the ranch accepts these tools, and I promise they'll be put to good use." "I have no doubt about that," Victoria replied. "Now Sophie mentioned that you've been working on the electrical system. How's that coming along?" As Marcus explained the progress he'd made and the challenges he'd encountered, he noticed that Victoria listened with the focused attention of someone who genuinely understood the technical aspects of what he was describing. Her questions were precise and demonstrated a knowledge of electrical systems that went beyond what most ranch owners would possess. "You seem to know a lot about this kind of work," Marcus observed. Victoria's expression became slightly guarded. "I've had to learn a lot of different skills running this place. You pick things up." It was a deflection, Marcus realized, but a polite one. Victoria had secrets, that much was becoming clear, but she wasn't ready to share them, and Marcus respected that. Everyone had parts of their past they preferred to keep private. Over the following days, Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed energy, partly because of the excellent tools Victoria had provided, but more because of the growing sense that he was contributing to something meaningful. The ranch was more than just a business. It was a carefully maintained ecosystem where every repair and improvement served a larger purpose. He began to notice details that had escaped his attention during his first weeks. The way Victoria had positioned the cattle shelters to take advantage of natural windbreaks. The sophisticated water management system that captured and recycled rainwater. The rotation schedule for the pastures that kept the grass healthy and productive. Every aspect of the operation reflected careful planning and deep understanding of sustainable agriculture. More intriguingly, Marcus began to observe the stream of visitors who came to the ranch. They arrived in expensive vehicles and dressed in business attire that seemed out of place among the cattle and hay fields. Victoria would meet with them in her office, and while Marcus couldn't hear their conversations, the body language suggested these were serious business discussions, rather than casual visits. One morning, while Marcus was repairing a gate near the main house, he overheard part of a phone conversation Victoria was having on the porch. Her voice carried clearly in the still air. "The Denver processing facility is operating at 95% efficiency," she was saying. "Labor costs are down 8% from last quarter, and we're ahead of schedule on the expansion project. Processing facility." The words stuck in Marcus's mind as he continued his work. Sunset Ridge Ranch was clearly more than a simple cattle operation, but he'd assumed Victoria sold her cattle to other processors. The conversation suggested she owned processing facilities as well. That afternoon, Sophie made a discovery that would prove more significant than any of them realized at the time. She had been exploring the ranch house at Victoria's invitation, looking for books in what Victoria had described as the library. Instead, she found herself in a room lined with awards, certificates, and photographs that told a story Victoria had been careful not to share. "Daddy," Sophie said that evening over dinner, "Miss Victoria has a room full of prizes." Marcus looked up from his plate of the excellent beef stew Victoria had brought over earlier. "What kind of prizes, sweetheart?" "Business prizes. There's one that says Businesswoman of the Year and another one that says something about the meat industry." Sophie struggled with the unfamiliar words. "And there are pictures of her with lots of important-looking people." Marcus felt a chill of unease. The meat industry, combined with the overheard conversation about processing facilities, a picture was beginning to emerge that changed everything he thought he knew about his employer. "Sophie," he said carefully, "did Miss Victoria know you were looking at these things?" "She said I could explore, but then her phone rang and she had to take a call. I didn't touch anything, I promise. I know you didn't, sweetheart. But maybe we should keep what you saw to ourselves for now, okay?" Sophie nodded solemnly, sensing the gravity in her father's tone even if she didn't understand the reason for it. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything other than the implications of what his daughter had discovered. If Victoria Hartwell was involved in the meat industry at a level that earned business awards, she was far more than a simple ranch owner. She was likely a major player in an industry that Marcus, like many people, associated with corporate agriculture and the kind of impersonal business practices that put profit above everything else. Yet that image didn't reconcile with the woman he'd come to know over the past month. Victoria treated her animals with obvious care, maintained her land with attention to sustainability, and showed genuine concern for her employees' welfare. There had to be more to the story. The next morning brought an opportunity for answers that Marcus hadn't expected. Victoria approached him while he was working on the barn roof, looking unusually hesitant. "Marcus, I have a favor to ask," she said. "I have a business emergency that requires me to fly to Chicago immediately. I'll be gone for 3 days, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to oversee things here while I'm away." Marcus set down his hammer and looked at her carefully. "What would that involve exactly?" "Nothing complicated. The ranch hands know their routines, and there aren't any major issues scheduled. But I'd feel better knowing someone responsible was keeping an eye on things. Someone I trust." The word trust carried weight, and Marcus felt the responsibility of it. "Of course, whatever you need. Thank you." Victoria's relief was evident. "There's a folder in my office with emergency contacts and procedures. My cell phone will be on if anything urgent comes up." As Victoria prepared to leave, Marcus found himself wondering about the nature of her business emergency. Chicago was a major hub for agricultural processing and distribution. If Victoria was indeed involved in the meat industry at a corporate level, Chicago would be exactly where such emergencies would need to be handled. The first day of Victoria's absence passed without incident. Marcus maintained his usual work schedule while keeping an eye on the ranch hands and checking on the cattle. But on the second day, something happened that would test both his character and his growing loyalty to Victoria. A black sedan arrived at the ranch around midday, carrying 2 men in expensive suits who clearly weren't there to discuss cattle. They approached Marcus as he was working near the main barn, their manner polite but insistent. "We're looking for Victoria Hartwell," the taller of the 2 men said. "We understand she's the owner here." "She's not available," Marcus replied, continuing his work but staying alert. "Can I take a message? When will she be back?" "I'm not sure. Can I ask what this is regarding?" The men exchanged glances before the shorter one spoke. "We're from the Environmental Compliance Group. We're investigating some concerns about waste management practices at several facilities operated by Hartwell Industries." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Hartwell Industries. The name carried implications that went far beyond Sunset Ridge Ranch. "I'm just the ranch hand," Marcus said carefully. "I don't know anything about other facilities." "But you work here," the taller man pressed. "You must see the cattle trucks, the transportation schedules. We're particularly interested in where the cattle go when they leave this ranch." Marcus realized he was being asked to potentially incriminate his employer, and his instincts rebelled against the idea. Whatever Victoria's business might involve, she had treated him and Sophie with genuine kindness and respect. "Like I said, I just maintain the property. I don't handle livestock transportation." The men spent another 10 minutes trying different approaches, but Marcus remained politely unhelpful. Eventually, they left their business cards and departed, leaving Marcus to wrestle with the implications of their visit. That evening, Marcus called Victoria's cell phone. She answered on the second ring, and he could hear the bustle of what sounded like a busy restaurant or hotel lobby in the background. "Marcus, is everything all right?" "There were some men here today asking questions," Marcus said. "They said they were from something called the Environmental Compliance Group." There was a long pause before Victoria responded, and when she did, her voice was carefully controlled. "What did you tell them?" "That I was just the ranch hand and didn't know anything about other facilities." Another pause. "Thank you. Did they leave contact information?" "Business cards." "I put them on your desk. I'll handle it when I get back." "Was there anything else?" Marcus hesitated. The conversation felt like a crossroads, a moment when he could either probe deeper or accept the boundaries Victoria had established. In the end, his respect for her privacy won out. "No, nothing else. Everything here is running smoothly." "Good. I'll see you tomorrow evening." After ending the call, Marcus sat on his porch looking out over the ranch that had become home to him and Sophie. The peaceful scene seemed at odds with the suggestion of environmental violations and corporate wrongdoing. Yet he couldn't deny that there were aspects of Victoria's business that she kept carefully hidden. The question that haunted him as he prepared for bed was whether those hidden aspects were things he could live with. Sophie was happy here, safer and more settled than she'd been since her mother's death. Marcus himself had found not just employment, but a sense of purpose in maintaining and improving the ranch. Was he prepared to walk away from all of that based on suspicions and implications rather than facts? The next evening, Victoria returned from Chicago looking tired but determined. She thanked Marcus for watching over things and handed him an envelope that he assumed contained his regular pay. When he opened it later, he found not only his weekly salary but a significant bonus with a note that read simply, "Thank you for your discretion and loyalty." That weekend, Marcus and Sophie joined Victoria for their now traditional Saturday morning breakfast on the main house porch. It was a ritual that had developed naturally over the past month, and one that Sophie looked forward to all week. As they ate pancakes and watched the sun rise over the pastures, Victoria seemed more relaxed than Marcus had seen her since her return from Chicago. "Sophie, would you like to help me move some of the calves to a new pasture this morning?" Victoria asked. Sophie's eyes lit up with excitement. "Can I really help, like a real cowgirl?" "Like a real cowgirl," Victoria confirmed with a smile. As Marcus watched Victoria interact with his daughter, he found it impossible to reconcile. The woman before him with the corporate villain that the environmental investigators seemed to be pursuing. Victoria was patient with Sophie's questions, careful about her safety, and genuinely delighted by the child's enthusiasm. Later that afternoon, while Sophie was napping and Victoria was working in her office, Marcus made a decision that would define his relationship with his employer going forward. He knocked on the office door and waited for Victoria's invitation to enter. "I need to ask you something," he said without preamble, "and I need you to be honest with me." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming carefully neutral. "All right. Are you doing anything here or anywhere else that could hurt Sophie? Not financially or professionally, but actually harm her health or safety?" Victoria met his gaze steadily. "No. I would never put Sophie at risk or allow her to be in a place where she could be harmed." "That's all I need to know," Marcus said. Victoria studied his face for a long moment. "You're not going to ask about the environmental investigators? About what they might find?" "That's your business," Marcus replied. "What matters to me is whether this is a safe place for my daughter and whether you're the kind of person who would protect her if necessary. And you believe I am?" Marcus thought about the past month, Victoria's patience with Sophie's questions, her thoughtful gestures, the way she'd provided tools and housing without making him feel like a charity case. "Yeah," he said simply. "I do. Something in." Victoria's expression softened. "Thank you. That means more than you might realize." As Marcus left the office, he felt a sense of resolution settle over him. He still didn't know all of Victoria's secrets, and he suspected there were aspects of her business that might trouble him if he knew the details. But he was certain that she cared about Sophie's welfare, and for now, that was enough. What Marcus didn't know was that his simple question and declaration of trust had affected Victoria more profoundly than she was prepared to admit. In her world of corporate maneuvering and careful alliances, genuine trust was rare and precious. The fact that Marcus was willing to extend it based on her character, rather than her explanations, represented something she hadn't experienced in years. That night, Victoria stood at her office window, looking out toward the cottage where Marcus and Sophie were settling in for the evening. The lights glowing in their windows made the ranch feel less like a business enterprise and more like a home. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria found herself questioning whether the isolation she'd maintained for the sake of her business was worth the loneliness it created. The next few weeks brought a series of small incidents that deepened The bond between Victoria and the Thompson family, while simultaneously revealing more about the complexity of Victoria's business empire. A late-night emergency with a sick calf brought Victoria and Marcus together in the barn, working side by side to save the animal. Sophie's birthday prompted Victoria to organize a small celebration that felt more like a family gathering than an employer's gesture. Each interaction added another layer to their relationship, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that would soon be tested in ways none of them anticipated. The peaceful rhythm of ranch life continued, but beneath the surface, forces were gathering that would challenge everything they'd built together. Marcus began to notice subtle signs of stress in Victoria's behavior: longer hours spent on phone calls, tension in her shoulders when she thought no one was watching, and a watchfulness that suggested she was expecting trouble. He didn't pry, but he made sure to be more attentive to the ranch's security and more available if Victoria needed support. Sophie, with the perceptiveness of childhood, sensed the undercurrents of worry and responded by being extra helpful and affectionate. With Victoria, she began leaving small drawings and notes around the ranch house, cheerful messages that seemed to brighten Victoria's mood whenever she discovered them. The bond between the three of them was growing stronger, but it was also becoming more fragile as external pressures mounted. The peaceful sanctuary of Sunset Ridge Ranch was about to be tested by forces from Victoria's carefully compartmentalized business world, and the choices Marcus and Victoria made in the coming crisis would determine not only their professional relationship, but the very real possibility of something deeper. As autumn deepened and the first hints of winter appeared in the morning air, Marcus found himself hoping that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The ranch had given him and Sophie more than just a place to live and work. It had given them a chance to be part of something larger than themselves. Whether that chance would survive the revelations to come remained to be seen, but Marcus was determined to protect what they'd built, whatever the cost. The November storm arrived without warning, transforming the peaceful ranch into a battlefield. Against nature's fury, Marcus woke to the sound of wind howling through the eaves of the cottage and rain hammering against the windows with unusual intensity. Through the darkness, he could see the lights of the main house blazing as emergency protocols kicked into action. By the time Marcus had dressed and checked on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos outside, his phone was buzzing with a text from Victoria. "Emergency in South Pasture. Meet me at Barn 3. The wind nearly knocked Marcus off his feet as he fought his way across the ranch yard. Rain drove horizontally, turning the normally well-drained pathways into streams of mud and debris. When he reached Barn 3, he found Victoria already there, dressed in rain gear and looking grimmer than he'd ever seen her. "We've got 40 head of cattle trapped in the South Pasture," she shouted over the wind. "The creek's flooded and washed out the bridge. They're on high ground for now, but if this water keeps rising, they'll be cut off completely." Marcus peered through the rain toward the pasture she indicated. Even in the poor visibility, he could see the dark shapes of cattle huddled together on what appeared to be an island surrounded by rushing water. "How do we get them out?" he asked. "Very carefully," Victoria replied, her jaw set with determination. "The old logging road might still be passable on the north side, but we'll need to clear some fallen trees first." What followed was 3 hours of the most demanding physical labor Marcus had experienced since his construction days. Working alongside Victoria and 2 ranch hands who'd answered the emergency call, they used chainsaws to clear a path through the storm debris, then carefully guided the frightened cattle to safety through knee-deep water and treacherous footing. Victoria worked with an intensity that impressed even the experienced ranch hands. She seemed to know exactly where each animal would try to bolt, which obstacles would cause the most problems, and how to coordinate their efforts for maximum efficiency. There was nothing theoretical about her knowledge. This was hard-earned expertise applied under the worst possible conditions. When the last cow reached safe ground, Marcus found himself standing next to Victoria in the relative shelter of the barn, both of them soaked to the skin and exhausted. For a moment, the professional distance she usually maintained dissolved completely. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "I couldn't have done that without you." "Yes, you could have," Marcus replied honestly. "You knew exactly what needed to be done. I just helped execute it." Victoria looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Most people would have stayed in the cottage and waited for morning. Most people don't understand that 40 head of cattle represent someone's livelihood," Marcus said. "And they definitely don't understand that those animals depend on us to keep them safe." Something shifted in Victoria's demeanor at those words. The mask of professional competence slipped just enough to reveal genuine gratitude and something else, a recognition that Marcus understood the responsibility that came with caring for living creatures. "Come up to the house," Victoria said. "You need dry clothes and hot coffee before you catch pneumonia." An hour later, Marcus found himself sitting in Victoria's kitchen, wearing borrowed clothes that were slightly too large, nursing a mug of coffee that seemed to chase the chill from his bones. Victoria had changed into jeans and a sweater, and without her usual business attire, she looked younger and somehow more approachable. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Victoria said, settling into the chair across from him. "About the cattle representing someone's livelihood." Marcus waited, sensing that she was working up to something important. "Most people see dollar signs when they look at livestock," Victoria continued. "They calculate feed costs and market prices and profit margins. But you see individual animals that need care and protection. They're living creatures," Marcus said simply. "They didn't choose to be here, so we owe them the best life we can provide." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's exactly how my grandmother felt. She used to say that being a steward of the land meant thinking beyond your own lifetime, beyond your own profit." It was the first time Victoria had mentioned her grandmother in personal terms, rather than simply as the previous owner of the Korea ranch. Marcus sensed an opening and decided to take a small risk. "She sounds like she was a wise woman. Did she teach you everything you know about ranching?" "She taught me the important things," Victoria replied. "How to read weather patterns, how to know when an animal is sick before it shows obvious symptoms, how to manage grassland so it stays productive for generations." She paused, then added more quietly, "She also taught me that success without integrity is just a different kind of failure." Marcus felt the weight of that statement. It seemed to carry implications beyond ranch management, touching on whatever business concerns had brought those environmental investigators to the property. "That's a hard lesson to learn in business," Marcus observed carefully. Victoria's expression grew distant. "It's harder to apply than you might think. Sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong, it's between different shades of compromise, and you have to decide which one you can live with." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs announced Sophie's arrival. She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her pajamas and looking concerned. "Daddy, I heard the storm and you weren't in the cottage." "Just helping Miss Victoria with the cattle, sweetheart," Marcus assured her. "Everything's fine now." Sophie padded over to the table, and Victoria automatically stood to pour her a glass of milk. The gesture was so natural, so motherly, that Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Were the cows scared?" Sophie asked, settling into a chair between Marcus and Victoria. "A little," Victoria admitted. "But your daddy helped rescue them, so they're safe and warm now." Sophie beamed with pride, and Marcus found himself watching Victoria's face as she interacted with his daughter. There was a tenderness there that Victoria usually kept carefully hidden, a maternal instinct that seemed to emerge naturally despite her professional reserve. "Miss Victoria," Sophie said thoughtfully, "do you have children?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Victoria's expression became carefully neutral, But Marcus caught a flicker of something: pain, perhaps, or regret. "No, sweetheart," Victoria said gently. "I don't. Would you like to?" Sophie asked with the innocent directness that only children could manage. Victoria glanced at Marcus, seeming to seek guidance about how to respond. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod, indicating that Sophie's questions came from curiosity rather than any agenda. "I think I would have," Victoria said slowly. "But sometimes life takes you in different directions than you planned." Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all adult conversations. "Daddy says that sometimes the best things come when you're not looking for them." Victoria's eyes met Marcus's across the table, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with unspoken possibility. Then Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming call, breaking the spell. "I should take this," she said, glancing at the screen. "Ranch business." As Victoria stepped into her office to take the call, Marcus and Sophie finished their milk and prepared to return to the cottage. Through the office door, Marcus could hear fragments of Victoria's conversation, and what he heard made him uneasy. "No, the inspectors haven't been back," Victoria was saying. "But we need to be prepared for unannounced visits. Yes, all the documentation is current. I understand the liability concerns, but we're not changing our protocols based on intimidation tactics." Marcus hurried Sophie toward the door, not wanting to overhear any more than he already had. But the conversation reinforced his growing certainty that Victoria was dealing with serious business pressures that went far beyond ranch management. The next morning brought clear skies and the kind of crisp air that made the previous nights. Storms seemed like a fever dream. Marcus was assessing damage around the ranch when Victoria approached him with a tablet in hand and an expression that mixed determination with nervousness. "I want to show you something," she said without preamble. "Something that might change how you feel about working here." Marcus set down the fence post he'd been examining and followed Victoria to her office. The room was lined with the awards and certificates that Sophie had discovered weeks earlier, but Victoria led him to a wall he hadn't noticed before. One covered with photographs that told a story spanning decades. "This was my grandmother, Alina Hartwell," Victoria said, pointing to a black and white photograph of a weathered woman standing next to a prize bull. "She started this ranch in 1952 with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from her parents." The subsequent photographs showed the ranch's evolution over the years: new buildings, expanded herds, awards, and recognition from agricultural organizations. But it was the final section of photographs that made Marcus's breath catch. "And this," Victoria said quietly, "is what the ranch became under my leadership." The photographs showed massive industrial facilities, processing plants, distribution centers, corporate headquarters buildings that seemed to stretch for acres. In several of the photos, Victoria appeared alongside politicians, business leaders, and other figures Marcus recognized from news coverage. "Hartwell Industries," Marcus said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "One of the largest integrated meat processing companies in North America," Victoria confirmed. 43 processing facilities, 12 distribution centers, and over 15,000 employees. Marcus stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the woman who had worked beside him in the storm with the corporate executive shaking hands with senators and governors. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steadier than Marcus expected. "Because those environmental investigators are just the beginning. There are people who would like to see Hartwell Industries fail, and they're willing to attack anything connected to the company, including this ranch. I wanted you to understand what you might be getting into by staying here." "What kind of attacks?" Victoria moved to her desk and pulled out a thick folder. "Media campaigns, regulatory challenges, lawsuits, protests. Some legitimate, some not. The meat processing industry has enemies, and successful companies make attractive targets." Marcus opened the folder and found newspaper clippings, investigative reports, and legal documents that painted a picture of a company under siege. Some of the accusations were serious environmental violations, worker safety issues, animal welfare concerns. Others seemed designed more to generate headlines than address real problems. "Are any of these accusations true?" Marcus asked directly. Victoria met his gaze without flinching. "Some of them. We've had facilities that didn't meet our standards, employees who violated protocols, situations where we could have done better. When you operate at our scale, problems are inevitable. The question is how you respond to them." "And how do you respond?" "We fix what's broken, we hold people accountable, and we try to do better next time," Victoria said. "But we don't apologize for being successful, and we don't sacrifice good employees to appease people who won't be satisfied with anything less than our complete destruction." Marcus studied the documents for several minutes, processing the implications of what Victoria had revealed. The woman he'd come to respect and trust was at the center of an industry that many people viewed with suspicion and hostility. Yet, nothing in his personal experience with Victoria suggested that she was the callous corporate villain her enemies depicted. "Why did you really bring me here?" Marcus asked finally. "Operation this size could afford to hire the best ranch management company in the country. Why hire an unemployed construction worker?" Victoria's expression grew vulnerable in a way Marcus had never seen before. "Because I needed someone who would see this place the way my grandmother did, as a home and a responsibility, not just a business asset. Someone who would care about the animals and the land for their own sake, not because of what they represent on a balance sheet." She moved to the window and looked out over the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully in the morning sun. "This ranch is where I learned everything that matters about integrity and responsibility," Victoria continued. "It's where my grandmother taught me that how you treat the weakest creatures in your care defines who you really are. I needed someone here who understood that, because if I lose this place, if I lose the connection to those values, then nothing else I've built is worth preserving." Marcus felt the weight of that confession. Victoria wasn't just offering him employment. She was entrusting him with something that represented the core of her identity. "The people investigating your company," Marcus said slowly, "do they know about your connection to this ranch?" "Not yet. But they will eventually. When they do, this place will become a target. They'll look for violations, safety issues, anything they can use to damage the company's reputation." "And you want me to help you prepare for that?" Victoria turned from the window to face him directly. "I want you to help me make sure this ranch represents the best of what we stand for. I want every fence post straight, every building maintained to the highest standard, every animal receiving the best possible care. When they come, and they will come, I want them to find a operation that exemplifies everything we claim to believe about responsible agriculture." Marcus understood the magnitude of what Victoria was asking. She wasn't just offering him a job. She was asking him to be her partner in protecting something precious and vulnerable in the face of forces that neither of them could fully control. "What about Sophie?" Marcus asked. "You're talking about turning this place into a battleground. Is that fair to her?" Victoria's expression softened. "Sophie is the reason I'm asking you to stay rather than telling you to leave. She deserves to grow up in a place where integrity and hard work are valued, where adults keep their promises and protect what matters. I can't guarantee that the next few months will be easy, but I can promise that she'll be safe here." Marcus looked around the office, taking in the photographs that chronicled Victoria's rise from ranch inheritance to corporate leadership. Then he thought about Sophie's happiness over the past few months, about the security and stability that Sunset Ridge Ranch had provided them both. "I need to think about this," Marcus said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Marcus spent the rest of the day working on routine maintenance tasks while his mind wrestled with Victoria's revelations. The ranch that had seemed like a peaceful sanctuary was actually the calm center of a storm that was building strength in the world beyond its borders. Staying meant accepting the risk that Sophie might be exposed to conflict and controversy. Leaving meant giving up the first real home they'd found since Rebecca's death. That evening, as Marcus and Sophie shared dinner in their cottage, his daughter made an observation that crystallized his thinking. "Daddy, Miss Victoria seemed sad. Today, did something bad happen?" Marcus looked at Sophie, noting the genuine concern in her young face. Over the past months, Victoria had become important to both of them, not just as an employer, but as someone they cared about. "She's dealing with some difficult business problems," Marcus said carefully. "People who don't like her company are trying to cause trouble." Sophie considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "But she's a good person, right? She takes care of the animals and she's nice to us." "Yes, sweetheart, she's a good person." "Then we should help her," Sophie said with the simple logic of childhood. Good people shouldn't have to face bad things alone. That night, Marcus called his sister in Denver, the only family he had left besides Sophie. He explained the situation as carefully as he could, seeking perspective from someone who knew him well enough to offer honest advice. "It sounds like this woman has been good to you and Sophie," his sister said after listening to the whole story. "And it sounds like you care about her." "It's not that simple," Marcus protested. "There are business considerations, legal risks." "Marcus," his sister interrupted gently, "when has your life ever been simple? You're a single father working construction jobs to pay medical bills. Simple went out the window a long time ago." She paused, then continued more seriously. "The question isn't whether this situation is complicated. The question is whether you trust this woman enough to stand by her when things get difficult. Because from what you've told me, she's already proven that she'll stand by you." After ending the call, Marcus sat on his porch looking toward the main house. Lights glowed in Victoria's office windows, and he knew she was probably working late into the night, trying to manage problems that stretched far beyond the peaceful boundaries of Sunset Ridge Ranch. Sophie was right, Marcus realized. Good people shouldn't have to face difficult things alone. And Victoria had demonstrated through actions rather than words that she was someone worth defending. The next morning, Marcus found Victoria in the equipment barn, performing routine maintenance on a tractor with the focused intensity she brought to everything. He watched her work for a moment, admiring the competence and care she showed even for mundane tasks. "I've made my decision," Marcus said when she looked up. Victoria set down her wrench and waited, her expression carefully neutral. "Sophie and I are staying," Marcus continued. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Victoria's composure cracked just enough to reveal the relief and gratitude she'd been trying to hide. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You have no idea what that means to me." "I think I do," Marcus replied. "But I have one condition." "Name it. No more secrets between us. If there are problems coming, I need to know about them." "I can't protect what I don't understand." Victoria nodded. "Agreed. Full disclosure from now on." As Marcus returned to his work, he felt a sense of resolution settle over him. The choice had been made, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them as a team. The peaceful sanctuary of Sunset Ridge Ranch was about to be tested, but Marcus was determined that it would emerge stronger, rather than broken. What none of them knew was that the first real test was already approaching. In corporate offices hundreds of miles away, decisions were being made that would bring the outside world crashing into their carefully protected domain. The storm that had threatened the cattle was nothing compared to the human tempest that was gathering strength. But for now, there was work to be done, animals to care for, and a home to protect. Marcus had chosen his side, and Victoria had found an ally she hadn't dared to hope for. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with Sophie's innocent wisdom and boundless trust to remind them of what they were fighting to preserve. The ranch continued its peaceful rhythms, but beneath the surface, everyone could sense that change was coming. The question was whether their growing bond would be strong enough to survive the trials ahead, or whether the forces arrayed against Victoria's empire would succeed in destroying everything they'd built together. As November gave way to December, the first signs of the approaching storm began to appear. Strange vehicles were spotted on roads near the ranch. Phone calls came at odd hours, and Victoria's trips to corporate headquarters became more frequent and more urgent. The sanctuary was becoming a fortress, and the family they'd created was about to face its greatest test. But Marcus had made his choice, Victoria had revealed her truth, and Sophie continued to believe in the power of good people standing together against whatever darkness threatened their home. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Sunset Ridge Ranch, but the future of three people who had found in each other something worth fighting for. The first television news van arrived on a Tuesday morning. In early December, rolling through the gates of Sunset Ridge Ranch like an unwelcome harbinger of the chaos to come. Marcus spotted it from his position on the barn roof, where he was installing new gutters, and immediately climbed down to intercept whatever storm was about to break over their peaceful sanctuary. The reporter who emerged from the van was a polished woman in her 30s, followed by a cameraman and a sound technician. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals who had done this dance many times before, setting up equipment and preparing to capture whatever story they had come to tell. "Excuse me," Marcus called out as he approached. "This is private property. You'll need permission from the owner to be here." The reporter turned toward him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 Investigates. We're here to speak with Victoria Hartwell about allegations of environmental violations at her processing facilities." "Ms. Hartwell isn't available for interviews," Marcus replied firmly. "I'll need to ask you to leave." "Are you the ranch foreman?" Walsh asked, signaling to her cameraman to start recording. "What's your name, and how long have you worked for Hartwell Industries?" Marcus realized he was being ambushed, that his words would be edited and shaped to fit whatever narrative the news team had already constructed. "I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone. This is private property, and you need to leave immediately. Sir, we have credible reports that cattle from this ranch are being processed at facilities where serious environmental violations have occurred." Walsh continued, stepping closer with her microphone. "Don't the workers here have a right to know what kind of operation they're supporting?" Before Marcus could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Mr. Thompson, please escort these people off my property. If they refuse to leave, call the sheriff." Victoria strode across the ranch yard with the commanding presence Marcus had come to associate with her corporate persona. She was dressed in jeans and boots, but something in her bearing made it clear that she was accustomed to being obeyed. "Miss Hartwell," Walsh called out, wheeling toward her new target. "Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 Investigates. We'd like to ask you about the EPA violations at your Denver processing facility and whether cattle from this ranch are being sent there despite ongoing environmental concerns." Victoria stopped walking and regarded the reporter with cool assessment. "Ms. Walsh, you're trespassing on private property. Any questions about Hartwell Industries operations can be directed to our corporate communications department. But surely you understand the public's right to know about potential health hazards in their food supply." Walsh pressed. "EPA documents show that your Denver facility has been cited for improper waste disposal and water contamination. Are you continuing to process cattle from this ranch at that facility?" Marcus watched Victoria's face, seeing the careful control she maintained even as the reporter's questions struck at the heart of her business empire. There was no defensiveness in Victoria's demeanor, no anger, just the steady composure of someone who had faced hostile questioning before. "I understand your need to generate compelling television," Victoria replied evenly. but I won't be participating in ambush journalism on my private property. You have 5 minutes to pack up your equipment and leave, or I'll have you removed." Walsh tried several more approaches, but Victoria simply turned and walked away, leaving Marcus to supervise the news crew's departure. As the van disappeared down the gravel road, Marcus found Victoria standing in her office, staring out the window with an expression he couldn't read. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked quietly. Victoria turned from the window, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked truly tired. "Bad enough. The Denver facility has been having problems with their wastewater treatment system. We've invested millions in upgrades, but the repairs are taking longer than expected." "Are there actual health risks?" "Not to consumers," Victoria said quickly. "The contamination is contained to the facility's immediate area, and we've implemented additional testing protocols. But the optics are terrible, and our competitors are using the situation to question our entire operation." Marcus absorbed this information, feeling the weight of the crisis that was building around them. What does this mean for the ranch? "It means we're about to become the center of a media storm," Victoria replied grimly. "Sunset Ridge Ranch will be portrayed as the source of cattle that are processed at a contaminated facility. The fact that we've never actually sent cattle to Denver won't matter. The narrative is already being written." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Sophie's teacher. "Please call me as soon as possible regarding Sophie. Nothing urgent, but we need to discuss something that happened at school today." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I need to make a phone call," he told Victoria, stepping into the hallway. Mrs. Patterson, Sophie's third-grade teacher, answered on the first ring. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for calling. Sophie is fine, but I wanted you to know about an incident during lunch today. Some of the older children were teasing her about the ranch where you work, saying that you help people who poison animals." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the first real impact of the media attention on his daughter's innocent world. "How did Sophie handle it?" "She defended you and Ms. Hartwell very strongly," Mrs. Patterson said, with a note of admiration in her voice. "She told them that Ms. Hartwell takes better care of her animals than most people take care of their pets, and that you would never work anywhere that hurt animals. But she was quite upset afterward. I'll talk to her when she gets home." Marcus promised. "Thank you for letting me know." When Marcus returned to Victoria's office, she took one look at his face and asked, "Sophie?" "Kids at school heard about the news story. They're giving her a hard time." Victoria's expression hardened in a way Marcus had never seen. "Those children are innocent victims of adult conflicts they don't understand. Sophie shouldn't have to pay the price for battles she didn't choose." "It's not your fault," Marcus said, though he was struggling with his own anger at the situation. "Isn't it?" Victoria challenged. "I knew this day would come eventually. I should have prepared better, should have found a way to protect the people who matter to me." The phrase "people who matter to me" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither was quite ready to address directly. Instead, Marcus focused on the immediate problem. What can we do to minimize the impact on Sophie? Victoria was quiet for a moment, thinking. There's a private school in the next county. Excellent academics, small classes, very discreet about their students' families. I could arrange for Sophie to transfer there if you think it would help. Marcus felt a complex mix of gratitude and unease at the offer. Victoria's wealth and connections could solve problems that he couldn't even begin to address, but accepting such help felt like crossing a line he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. "Let me talk to Sophie first," Marcus said. "See how she wants to handle it." That afternoon, when Sophie got off the school bus, Marcus could see the tension in her small shoulders and the careful way she avoided his eyes. They walked to the cottage in silence, and it wasn't until they were settled at the kitchen table with milk and cookies that Sophie finally spoke. "Daddy, are we doing something bad by working here?" The question pierced Marcus's heart. Sophie's world had been built on simple certainties, that her father was a good man who did honest work, that the people they cared about were worthy of that care, that right and wrong were clearly distinguishable. "No, sweetheart," Marcus said firmly. "We're not doing anything bad. Miss Victoria runs a good ranch, where animals are treated well and workers are treated fairly. Some people don't like her company for reasons that have nothing to do with this ranch. But the kids at school said she poisons cows and makes people sick." Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that Sophie's understanding of this situation would shape how she viewed the adult world for years to come. Sometimes when companies get very big and successful, other people try to hurt them by spreading stories that aren't completely true. Miss Victoria's company has thousands of workers and dozens of facilities. If problems happen at one place, people try to make it seem like the whole company is bad. Sophie considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "But we know Miss Victoria isn't bad, right? We've seen how she takes care of the animals here." "That's exactly right," Marcus confirmed. "We judge people by what we see them do, not by what other people say about them. Then I don't care what the kids at school think," Sophie declared with fierce loyalty. "Miss Victoria is our friend, and friends stick together when things get hard." That evening, Victoria joined them for dinner at the cottage, a first since they'd arrived at the ranch. She seemed different in the smaller, more intimate space, less like a corporate executive and more like a woman seeking comfort among people who accepted her without judgment. "I want to apologize to both of you," Victoria said as they shared a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables. "You didn't sign up for this kind of scrutiny and stress." "Neither did you," Sophie replied with the directness that often surprised adults. "Bad things happen to good people sometimes. That doesn't mean the good people did anything wrong." Victoria's eyes misted slightly at Sophie's simple wisdom. "You're very wise for someone who's only 8 years old. Daddy says I get it from my mama," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She always saw the best in people, even when other people couldn't see it." The conversation turned to lighter topics, but Marcus was acutely aware of the undercurrents flowing beneath their domestic tableau. Victoria seemed to be memorizing every detail of the evening, as if she was afraid it might be their last peaceful moment together. After Sophie went to bed, Marcus and Victoria sat on the cottage porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars emerge in the clear December sky. The ranch was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the bare trees. "Tell me about Rebecca," Victoria said quietly. Marcus was surprised by the request, but something in Victoria's tone suggested that she needed to understand the woman who had shaped both his and Sophie's lives. "She was a nurse," Marcus began slowly. "Worked in pediatric oncology because she said children needed adults who believed in miracles. She had this way of making everyone around her feel like they were capable of being better than they thought they were. She sounds remarkable. She was. When she got sick, she handled it with the same grace she brought to everything else. Never complained, never asked why me. Just focused on making sure Sophie would remember her as someone who faced life with courage." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I think she would approve of how you're raising Sophie." "I hope so. Some days I feel like I'm just improvising and hoping for the best." "That's what all good parents do," Victoria said with a sad smile. "The difference is that you're doing it out of love rather than obligation." Marcus sensed there was a story behind Victoria's comment, but he didn't push. Instead, he asked, "What about your parents? You've mentioned your grandmother, but never your mother or father." Victoria's expression grew distant. "My mother died when I was 12. Cancer, like Rebecca. My father remarried within a year to a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her own children's inheritance. I spent most of my teenage years here with my grandmother. That must have been difficult." "It was also the best thing that could have happened to me," Victoria said with unexpected warmth. "My grandmother taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who show up when you need them most." The weight of that statement settled between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge directly. They were creating something together, Marcus, Victoria, and Sophie, that felt increasingly like family, despite the unconventional circumstances that had brought them together. The next morning brought a development that would test their newly acknowledged bond in ways none of them had anticipated. Marcus was feeding the horses when Victoria's corporate attorney arrived unannounced, followed closely by a car full of federal investigators. The lead investigator, a serious woman in her 40s, introduced herself as Agent Sarah Chun from the Environmental Protection Agency. She presented Victoria with a warrant to search the ranch for evidence of environmental violations and improper disposal of agricultural waste. "This is harassment," Victoria's attorney protested. "Sunset Ridge Ranch has never been cited for any environmental violations." "That may be true," Agent Chun replied evenly, "but we have reports that cattle from this ranch are being processed at facilities where serious violations have occurred. We need to verify the chain of custody and ensure that no contaminated materials have been returned to this location." What followed was the most surreal day of Marcus's life. Federal agents swarmed over the ranch he had come to think of as home, taking photographs, collecting samples, and treating every aspect of the operation as potentially criminal. Victoria maintained her composure throughout the ordeal, but Marcus could see the strain in her eyes. Sophie, who had stayed home from school due to the continued harassment from classmates, watched the proceedings with wide-eyed confusion. "Daddy, why are all these people here? Are we in trouble?" Marcus knelt down to Sophie's level, choosing his words carefully. "Remember how we talked about people trying to hurt Miss Victoria's company? These people are just checking to make sure everything here is done properly." "But we know everything is done properly," Sophie said with absolute certainty. "Miss Victoria takes good care of everything." "That's right, sweetheart. And when they're done checking, they'll know it too." By late afternoon, the investigators had completed their search without finding any evidence of environmental violations. Agent Chun approached Victoria with what might have been grudging respect. "Your operation here is exemplary, Ms. Hartwell. Clean facilities, proper documentation, and animal welfare standards that exceed federal requirements." "Thank you," Victoria replied without satisfaction. "I hope your report will reflect that." "Sunset Ridge Ranch operates with complete integrity." "It will," Chun confirmed. "But I should warn you that this investigation is far from over. The problems at your Denver facility are serious, and there are questions about other operations as well." After the investigators left, Victoria, Marcus, and Sophie found themselves alone in the suddenly quiet ranch yard. The violation of their sanctuary had left all of them feeling shaken and exposed. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Victoria said to Sophie. "It must have been scary having all those strangers here." "I wasn't scared," Sophie replied with characteristic bravery. "I knew they wouldn't find anything bad because you don't do bad things." Victoria's composure finally cracked, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. Sophie immediately moved to hug her, and Marcus found himself wrapping his arms around both of them, creating a circle of comfort in the aftermath of the day's ordeal. "I don't want to lose this," Victoria whispered. "I don't want to lose either of you." "You won't," Marcus said firmly. "Whatever happens with your company, whatever the investigators find or don't find, we're not going anywhere." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus and Victoria sat in the ranch house kitchen, sharing coffee and trying to process the day's events. Victoria had shed her corporate armor completely, appearing vulnerable and human in a way that made Marcus's heart ache. "I've spent so many years building walls around myself," Victoria said quietly, "keeping everyone at a professional distance, never letting anyone get close enough to hurt me. But you and Sophie have somehow gotten past all of those defenses." "Is that a bad thing?" Marcus asked. "It's terrifying," Victoria admitted. Because now I have something to lose that matters more than all the business success in the world." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of real work despite her corporate wealth. Sometimes the things that scare us most are the things worth fighting for. Victoria looked into his eyes, and Marcus saw the exact moment when she stopped fighting the feelings that had been building between them for months. The professional distance dissolved completely, replaced by something real and vulnerable and infinitely precious. "I love you," she said simply. "Both of you. I know it's complicated and probably foolish, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just about employment or even friendship." Marcus felt his own walls crumbling, the careful boundaries he'd maintained since Rebecca's death, giving way to emotions he'd thought were gone forever. "I love you too," he said. "And it terrifies me just as much as it terrifies you." They sat in silence for a long moment, holding hands across the kitchen table and acknowledging the truth that had been growing between them despite all the reasons it should have been impossible. Outside, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, peaceful and eternal despite the chaos that had invaded their sanctuary that day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and Marcus knew there would be many, they would face them together as something more than employer and employee, something deeper than friends. They had become a family in the truest sense, bound not by law or obligation, but by choice and love and the determination to protect what they had built together. The storm that had been gathering around Victoria's corporate empire had finally broken over Sunset Ridge Ranch, but instead of destroying what they cherished most, it had revealed the true strength of their connection. Whatever came next, they would weather it together, as Marcus had promised, and as Sophie's innocent faith had always believed they would. Spring arrived at Sunset Ridge Ranch with a burst of wildflowers and the kind of warm sunshine that made the harsh winter feel like a distant memory. 6 months had passed since the federal investigation, and the changes that had swept through their lives during that time seemed to mirror the renewal happening across the landscape. Marcus stood on the porch of the main house watching Sophie chase butterflies through the meadow while Victoria worked in the vegetable garden she had planted behind the kitchen. The scene was so perfectly domestic that sometimes Marcus had to remind himself how dramatically their circumstances had shifted since those first uncertain days when he'd arrived looking for nothing more than honest work and a place for his daughter to feel safe. The phone call that had changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in late January, just as the worst of the media storm seemed to be subsiding. Victoria had been in her office, working through the latest batch of legal documents and damage control strategies, when her corporate attorney called with news that no one had anticipated. "The whistleblower at the Denver facility has recanted," the attorney had said without preamble. "Turns out he was being paid by Consolidated Foods to fabricate evidence of environmental violations. The EPA is dropping all charges, and we have grounds for a massive lawsuit against both Consolidated and the former employee." Victoria had listened to the details with growing amazement. The investigation that had nearly destroyed her reputation had been based on manufactured evidence, planted by her largest competitor in an attempt to discredit Hartwell Industries and capture their market share. The environmental violations at the Denver facility, while real, had been deliberately exaggerated and misrepresented to create the appearance of systematic corporate negligence. When Victoria shared the news with Marcus that evening, his reaction had been characteristically measured. "I'm glad the truth came out," he said simply. "But it doesn't change how I feel about you or about being here." That response had meant more to Victoria than any victory in court ever could. Marcus hadn't fallen in love with her corporate success or her wealth. He had chosen to stand by her when those things seemed likely to destroy everything they had built together. The vindication was satisfying, but the knowledge that Marcus's feelings weren't contingent on her professional rehabilitation was infinitely more valuable. The legal aftermath had taken months to resolve, but the outcome exceeded even Victoria's most optimistic projections. Consolidated Foods agreed to a settlement that included not only substantial financial damages, but also a public admission of their role in the conspiracy. The media outlets that had eagerly reported the original accusations were forced to issue corrections and retractions, though Victoria knew that the truth never spread as quickly as the scandal had. More importantly, the investigation had prompted Victoria to reevaluate every aspect of Hartwell Industries' operations. Working with environmental consultants and animal welfare experts, she had implemented new standards that went far beyond federal requirements. The company emerged from the crisis stronger and more ethical than it had ever been, a transformation that Victoria credited largely to the moral clarity she had gained from her life at Sunset Ridge Ranch. Now, as Marcus watched Victoria deadhead roses with the same focused attention she brought to everything else, he marveled at how seamlessly she had adapted to a life that balanced corporate leadership with the simple pleasures of ranch living. She still traveled regularly for business, still managed a company that employed thousands of people, but she had learned to find peace in smaller moments: morning coffee on the porch, evening walks through the pastures, helping Sophie with homework at the kitchen table. Sophie had blossomed during the months of uncertainty and renewal. The harassment at school had ended as quickly as it had begun, once the truth about the false accusations became public knowledge. But more than that, Sophie had developed a confidence and resilience that came from having weathered a real crisis, surrounded by adults who protected her without sheltering her from life's complexities. "Daddy, look!" Sophie called out, running toward the porch with a handful of wildflowers. "Miss Victoria says I can make a bouquet for the kitchen table." Marcus smiled, noting that Sophie had long since dropped the formal Ms. in favor of simply Victoria when speaking to him, though she maintained the polite address when speaking directly to Victoria herself. It was one of many small ways that their unconventional family had developed its own customs and traditions. "That's very thoughtful of you, sweetheart," Marcus replied. "I'm sure Victoria will love having fresh flowers in the house." Victoria emerged from the garden with dirt on her knees and satisfaction on her face. She had discovered an unexpected talent for coaxing beauty from the earth, and the gardens around the main house had become her favorite form of stress relief. "The tomatoes are already setting fruit," she announced, settling into the porch swing beside Marcus. "We might actually have enough for canning this year." "Canning?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "When did you become interested in food preservation?" "When I realized that store-bought tomatoes taste like cardboard compared to homegrown ones," Victoria replied with a laugh. "Besides, Sophie wants to learn, and I figured it would be good for both of us to understand where our food actually comes from." It was a response that perfectly captured how Victoria had changed over the past year. The woman who had once managed a food empire from corporate boardrooms was now determined to understand every step of the process from seed to table. She had become genuinely passionate about sustainable agriculture, not as a business strategy, but as a way of life that honored the land and the animals in their care. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their peaceful afternoon. Marcus looked up to see a familiar pickup truck making its way down the ranch road, and he smiled as he recognized the driver. "Looks like Jake is right on time," Marcus sighed, standing to greet their visitor. Jake Morrison had been Marcus's supervisor at the construction company in Millfield, and they had maintained a friendship despite the circumstances of Marcus's departure. When Jake had called the week before to say he was driving through the area and would like to stop by, Marcus had been genuinely pleased at the prospect of showing his old friend how well things had worked out. Jake climbed out of his truck with the careful movements of a man whose body had absorbed decades of hard physical labor. He was in his early 50s, weathered and practical, with the kind of straightforward honesty that Marcus had always appreciated. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake said, looking around at the ranch with obvious admiration. "This place is even more impressive than you described." Marcus made introductions, and Victoria welcomed Jake with the gracious hospitality that came naturally. To her, Sophie, who had been coached on the importance of making a good impression on her father's friend, shook Jake's hand solemnly and offered to show him the new calves. As they toured the ranch, Marcus found himself seeing the operation through Jake's eyes. The improvements he had made over the past year were substantial and visible: new fencing that was both functional and attractive, buildings that had been restored to pristine condition, equipment that was maintained with obvious care and pride. "You've done quite a job here," Jake observed as they stood in the main barn, admiring the organization and cleanliness that Marcus had brought to every aspect of the operation. "I always knew you were good at what you do, but this is something special." "I had excellent motivation," Marcus replied, glancing toward where Victoria was explaining the ranch's water management system to Sophie, "and excellent resources to work with." Jake followed his gaze and nodded with understanding. "She seems like a good woman. Smart, down to earth. Not what I expected from someone who runs a big corporation." "She's full of surprises," Marcus agreed. "The media never showed the side of her that actually matters." That evening, Victoria insisted that Jake stay for dinner, and the four of them gathered around the kitchen table for a meal that Victoria and Sophie had prepared together. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from construction techniques to cattle breeding to Sophie's latest reading adventures. Jake, who had never married and had no children of his own, was clearly charmed by Sophie's enthusiasm and intelligence. "You've got quite a daughter there," he told Marcus, during a moment when Sophie was helping Victoria serve dessert. "Rebecca would be proud of how she's turning out." The casual reference to Marcus's late wife created a moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Victoria had encouraged Marcus to share memories of Rebecca with Sophie, understanding that honoring the past was essential to building a healthy future. "She would have loved this place," Marcus said quietly. "The openness, the connection to the land, the sense of purpose in the work. She always said that happiness came from feeling useful." "Then she definitely would have approved of what you've built here," Jake observed, gesturing to encompass not just the ranch but the family that Marcus had found within it. After dinner, Jake and Marcus walked out to look at the stars while Victoria helped Sophie get ready for bed. The night was clear and cool, with the kind of vast sky that made earthly concerns seem manageable and temporary. "I have to ask," Jake said as they leaned against the pasture fence, "are you happy? Really happy, not just making the best of a difficult situation?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Happiness had seemed like an impossible luxury during the months after Rebecca's death, when simple survival had consumed all of his energy. Even during the early days at the ranch, he had been focused more on stability and security than on anything as ambitious as happiness. "Yeah," Marcus said finally. "I am happy, more than I thought I had any right to be. And Victoria?" You two." "We're figuring it out," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "It's complicated, mixing business with personal feelings, but we're committed to making it work." Jake nodded with satisfaction. "Good. You deserve someone who appreciates what you bring to the table. And that little girl deserves to grow up in a home where the adults are genuinely glad to be there." The next morning, Jake prepared to continue his journey, but not before accepting Victoria's invitation to return whenever his travels brought him through the area. As his truck disappeared down the ranch road, Sophie waved from the porch with the enthusiasm she brought to all goodbyes, already planning what she would show him during his next visit. "I like him," Victoria said, watching the dust settle behind Jake's departure. "He cares about you and Sophie without trying to complicate things. He's one of the good ones," Marcus agreed. "The kind of friend who shows up when you need him and doesn't ask for anything in return." It was a quality that Victoria had come to value highly, having spent too many years surrounded by people whose friendship was contingent on what she could do for them. The relationships she had built at Sunset Ridge Ranch were refreshingly free of ulterior motives or hidden agendas. The spring days fell into a rhythm that felt both purposeful and peaceful. Marcus continued to maintain and improve the ranch infrastructure, but his role had evolved beyond simple manual labor. Victoria had begun consulting him on long-term planning decisions, valuing his practical perspective and his deep understanding of how the ranch operated at ground level. Sophie thrived in the environment of adults who took her seriously while still protecting her innocence. She had developed a sophisticated understanding of ranch operations and could discuss cattle breeding or sustainable agriculture with a knowledge that impressed visitors. More importantly, she radiated the confidence that came from knowing she was loved and valued by the people who mattered most to her. One afternoon in late May, as Marcus was replacing boards in the corral fence, Victoria approached him with an expression that mixed nervousness with excitement. She was carrying a manila folder and seemed to be working up the courage to say something important. "I've been thinking about something," Victoria began, setting the folder on the fence rail between them. "About the future of this ranch and what we want it to become." Marcus set down his hammer and gave her his full attention. Over the months, he had learned to recognize when Victoria was building up to a significant announcement. "The thing is," Victoria continued, "this place has become more than just a ranch to me. It's become home in a way that nowhere else ever has. And I want to make sure it stays that way, regardless of what happens with the company or any other outside pressures." She opened the folder and handed Marcus a set of legal documents. "I want to transfer ownership of Sunset Ridge Ranch to a trust that will preserve it as a working ranch in perpetuity. No development, no corporate interference, just sustainable agriculture and animal husbandry." Marcus scanned the papers, noting the complexity of the legal language, but understanding the basic structure of what Victoria was proposing. "This is generous, but I'm not sure I understand the implications." "The implications are that this ranch will belong to the people who work it and love it, rather than to a corporation that might decide to sell it for development," Victoria explained. "I want you to be the primary trustee, with Sophie as the eventual inheritor. This land should belong to people who understand its value beyond dollars and cents." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Victoria was offering. "Victoria, I can't accept something like this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough," Victoria replied firmly. "You've given me something I didn't even know I was missing, a sense of home and family and purpose that has nothing to do with corporate success. This ranch should belong to people who will protect it and preserve it for future generations." Before Marcus could formulate a response, Sophie came running across the pasture with her usual boundless energy. "Daddy! Victoria, come look at what I found." She led them to the pond where a family of ducks had established residence, chattering excitedly about the new ducklings that had appeared seemingly overnight. As Marcus and Victoria watched Sophie's delight in this simple miracle of nature, Marcus felt the rightness of what Victoria was proposing settle into his bones. "We'll need to discuss the details," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Make sure everything is structured properly." Victoria's face lit up with relief and joy. "Then you'll consider it?" "I'll do more than consider it," Marcus replied. "I'll make sure this place thrives for as long as I'm able to care for it." That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Marcus and Victoria sat on the porch swing, planning the practical details of the trust arrangement. But underneath the legal and financial considerations, they were really talking about their future together, not just as romantic partners, but as partners in the larger project of creating something meaningful and lasting. "There's something else I want to discuss," Victoria said as the conversation wound down. "Something personal." Marcus waited, sensing the importance of whatever she was preparing to share. "I know we've been taking things slowly, being careful not to rush into anything that might affect Sophie," Victoria began. "But I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger." "Mine too," Marcus admitted. "But I worry about the example we're setting for Sophie, about what message we're sending about relationships and commitment." Victoria turned to face him directly, her expression serious but warm. What if we weren't just setting an example? What if we were actually making a commitment? Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he realized what Victoria was suggesting. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you would consider marrying me, Victoria said with the directness that he had come to love about her. Not because we have to, not because of social expectations, but because we want to build a life together based on love and mutual respect and shared values. Marcus looked out over the ranch that had become their sanctuary, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he had been a desperate single father looking for any work that would pay the bills. Now he was contemplating marriage to a woman who had not only given him employment, but had helped him rediscover hope and purpose. Yes, Marcus said simply. I would very much like to marry you. Victoria's smile was radiant in the moonlight. Then I guess we're engaged. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about timing and logistics and how to share the news with Sophie. But mostly they just held each other, marveling at how love had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. The wedding took place on a perfect Saturday morning in September, surrounded by wildflowers and attended by the people who mattered most to them. Sophie served as maid of honor, wearing a yellow dress that matched the sunflowers Victoria had chosen for her bouquet. Jake drove down from Colorado to serve as Marcus's best man, and several of the ranch hands helped with the simple reception that followed the ceremony. The justice of the peace who performed the ceremony commented afterward that he had rarely seen a couple who seemed so perfectly matched, not just in their love for each other, but in their shared vision of what their life together should encompass. As they danced to acoustic guitar music in the barn that Marcus had renovated, surrounded by friends and family and the animals they cared for, Victoria whispered in Marcus's ear, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help that first day when my truck broke down?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Maybe not as quickly, maybe not in the same way, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be. Even if I had remained your mysterious corporate boss who you never really got to know." "Especially then," Marcus replied with a smile. "Because the woman I fell in love with was always there underneath the corporate exterior. You just needed the right circumstances to let her show." As autumn settled over Sunset Ridge Ranch, the newlywed family established routines that honored both their individual needs and their commitment to each other. Victoria continued to travel for business, but she limited her trips and made sure that home always remained her priority. Marcus took on increasing responsibility for ranch management, while still maintaining his hands-on approach to the work he loved. Sophie thrived as the bridge between her parents' different worlds, equally comfortable discussing quarterly earnings reports and cattle vaccination schedules. The ranch itself had become something of a model operation, attracting visitors from agricultural colleges and sustainable farming organizations. Victoria took pride in showing people that large-scale agriculture could be both profitable and ethical, that success didn't require sacrificing principles or cutting corners on animal welfare. On a crisp December morning, almost exactly 2 years after Marcus had first driven down the ranch road looking for work, the three of them stood together watching the sunrise paint the pastures gold. Sophie was taller now, more confident, still a voracious reader, but also developing practical skills that would serve her well regardless of what path her life eventually took. "What are you thinking about?" Victoria asked Marcus, noting the contemplative expression on his face. "Just how far we've all come," Marcus replied. 2 years ago, I thought I was just looking for a job. I had no idea I was actually looking for a home. And I thought I was just hiring a ranch hand," Victoria added. "I had no idea I was actually finding a family." Sophie, who had been listening to their conversation with the seriousness she brought to all adult topics, offered her own perspective. "Maybe that's how the best things happen," she said thoughtfully. When you're not looking for them, but you're ready for them anyway. Marcus and Victoria exchanged glances over Sophie's head, marveling once again at their daughter's wisdom. She was right, of course. The best things in life, love, family, home, purpose, rarely arrived according to plan. They emerged from unexpected encounters, from small acts of kindness, from the willingness to see beyond surface appearances to the deeper truths that connected people across all the artificial boundaries that society constructed. As they walked back toward the house for breakfast, Marcus reflected on the phone call he had received the week before. His former supervisor at the construction company had offered him a management position with significantly higher pay than his current salary. Marcus had declined without hesitation, not because the money wasn't tempting, but because he had learned that some things were more valuable than financial advancement. He had found work that fed his soul as well as his bank account. He had found love that challenged him to be better while accepting him exactly as he was. He had found a place where his daughter could grow up surrounded by beauty and purpose, and the knowledge that she was deeply cherished. Most importantly, he had learned that family wasn't just about blood relationships or legal documents. Family was about showing up for each other, about choosing to stay when things got difficult, about building something together that was stronger and more meaningful than what any of them could have created alone. As they reached the porch of the house that had become their sanctuary, Marcus paused to look back over the ranch that had given them so much more than employment or shelter. The land stretched away toward the horizon, peaceful and productive under the morning sky, tended by people who understood that true wealth came not from what you could extract from the earth, but from what you could contribute to its ongoing abundance. Sunset Ridge Ranch would endure long after they were gone, protected by the trust documents that ensured its preservation as a working ranch. But more than that, it would endure as a testament to the power of unexpected connections, to the possibility of finding love and purpose in the most unlikely circumstances, and to the simple truth that sometimes the most profound journeys began with nothing more than a willingness to help a stranger fix a broken-down truck. Inside the warm kitchen, as Victoria prepared coffee and Sophie set the table for breakfast, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing he was exactly where he belonged. The man who had arrived looking for honest work had found something infinitely more valuable, a home worth protecting, a family worth cherishing, and a future bright with the promise of all the small miracles that awaited them in the days to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.